Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Mean Girls Book Club. To those of you returning and to those of you joining us for the first time, we are so glad you're here. Happy Black History Month, everyone. I'm NIANI Feelings from the cast of the first national tour of Mean Girls, and joining me today are my amazing cast members from both the Broadway and touring companies. We're going to do quick introductions, say who you are, what role you play in the Mean Girls world, and where you're zooming in from. Let's start with Brittany.
Hi guys, Brittany Nicholas here. I am a female swing of the Mean Girls Broadway company, and I am zooming from Carrollton, Virginia.
Hi guys, I'm David Wright. I am zooming from Gainesville, Florida, and I play Jason Weems and cover Aaron Samuels and Kevin G in the first national tour.
Hey everybody, my name is Lawrence Street. I play Mr. Duvall in the first national tour of Mean Girls, and I am in Jersey City, New Jersey.
Hi, I'm ERIKA Henningsen. I played Katie Heron on Broadway, and I am zooming in from North Carolina, Wilmington, North Carolina.
Hi, I'm Morgan Bryant. I'm zooming from Opelika, Alabama, and I play Rachel Hamilton and understudy Karen Smith on the first national tour.
Hello, my name is FERNELL Hogan. I am zooming from Houston, Texas, and I play Martin Jitla in the first national tour.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to be covering a lot today, and we look forward to responding to all of your questions. Thank you so much for sharing your smart, thoughtful ideas with us, and we're going to try to get to as many as we can. This is our fourth Mean Girls Book Club discussion. And for those of you that have been with us the whole way, we are so grateful. For those of you who perhaps joining us for the first time, we're going to start off once again with why we are doing this. Our country has been plagued by racial injustice since its inception. Yet, coupled with a life-changing and frightening pandemic, this nation's struggle with race was certainly heightened this past year. As we head into this new year, there is still a lot of work to be done, and will always be a lot of work to be done. We all have a responsibility to be a part of the change and the conversation to bring about a brighter and more equal future. I also want to talk a bit about how and why we chose Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. Although Mildred Taylor, the author, couldn't be with us today, we asked her to tell us a bit about why she wrote the book in 1976 and what she hoped it means to audiences today. Her words really mirror our decision to choose this title. So let's hear some of her thoughts as read by our cast.
Why did I write Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry? I wanted to tell a true story about Black lives in America. During my school days, mostly in all-white classrooms except for me, classes devoted to the history of Black people in the United States caused me painful embarrassment. This would not have been so if that history had been presented truly, showing the accomplishments of Black people both in Africa and in this hemisphere.
But as it was presented, the indictment of slavery in America was also an indictment of the people who were enslaved, of people who, according to the texts, were docile and childlike, accepting their fate without once attempting to free themselves. To me, this lackluster history of Black people, totally devoid of any heroic or pride-building qualities, was as much a condemnation of myself as it was of my ancestors. I used to sit tensely, waiting out those class hours, trying to think of ways to repudiate what the textbook said, for I recognized that there was a terrible contradiction between what was in them and what I had learned at home.
That's super powerful. We are so grateful to have Mildred Taylor's words here. She's a legend, and this book is a classic, so it's really exciting. Okay, let's get into some discussion. So for the last three Mean Girls Book Club selections, we've read some new and modern books. This is the first time we've chosen something a little older that's also set further back in US history. Let's talk a bit about why the book still resonates today and what has changed in the US since the book was published in 1976. I'm gonna go to Fernell first.
Yeah, there are so many things that as I was reading, they feel like they all apply to today. Even from the first chapter when they started talking about the books. And Low Man opened his book and it was like, this was this person's book, and now it goes to the Negro. And I was like, I had an epiphany because that still is a thing the disparities of our education system, where, because schools are funded, at least here in Texas, they're funded by property taxes. So schools on this area, they get all these really nice things, and they have, every kid has his own book, and then when they don't want it, they send it down. And then it goes to this other school where like it's a hand-me-down book, and it just creates such a disparity. And that was in chapter 1. So as we kept going, it was like solving the problems of injustice and the things that were happening to them, and they were saying like, let's organize. And I was like, that's last year. We were doing that last week, actually, like organizing for the injustices of so many Black and brown people in the past year. What has changed? In the book, they talk about how Cassie was unaware of the world around her. We're all very aware now. We all have social media. We all have Facebook and Instagram and everything. So we see what's happening right in front of us like we're there. So that has changed.
Absolutely. Erika, you want to touch on that as well?
Yeah, I was going to say, FERNELL, that what has changed is I feel like the awareness, even for a young child at age 3, 4, I mean, hearing parents talking to their children about what they have to learn at such a young age, if they're a Black child, a child of color, like it's almost, I think it sort of helps that we have Cassie as our narrator to sort of see through her eyes as she's learning it. But I feel like young kids now, they unfortunately are learning these things far earlier than you would wish a child to be exposed to that. And in terms of what has not changed is, I think, like the economic inequality. It was really interesting but reading in this book sort of again about the way land and property was always in the hands of white owners forever, and how it sort of ensured that no matter the fact that perhaps slavery had ended, was that men and women were still beholden to these landowners. And that is something that especially over the course of this last summer, is realizing that racism is so pervasive and systemic inequality is so pervasive, and to the roots of things that, money is something that we can't always tangibly touch, but that system of inequality is there from day one. And that was something that I thought, in a way, especially for, even though this book was written and I read it when I was, I think, 11 or 12, and it was interesting to revisit it. I don't know if I understood that theme, because I didn't understand our capitalist nation, but rereading it now as an adult, it was so painfully obvious that no matter, this has been happening since land has been controlled by these white shareholders, and it trickles down till today.
Absolutely. That's something that I noticed too, with the land and like the importance of land to Black people. I know I've been seeing a lot of memes that are like, Black people don't sell grandma's house. And like, that's a real thing that like I tell my family as well, like, we're holding on to my grandma's house, like, but that is the same thing as them trying to hold on to Big Ma's house. It's the same theme. And it's still the same problem that we're facing right now. Brittany, did you want to comment on this as well?
I think that FERNELL and ERIKA have summed this up beautifully. I will say the land had that resonated with me, but also the car, for whatever reason, is just, I feel like today, Black people, it's like we're constantly trying to like climb a social ladder, right? And I feel like we get to a certain level, and then it's like something else that a white person puts into place that we have to climb again to get to a new level, and climb again to get to the land and the house and the cars. And so I just felt like they were, the Logan family was just constantly chasing after freedom and after just complete control of everything that they own. And it was just always something that would like, attack them from behind, that it's like, what now? And to me, that resonates a lot today, because I feel like Black people were still constantly climbing to get to a certain level of achievement. I don't know if you could say it that way, but just like a certain level of control that I feel like white people have been given since birth. And I will say that um, what has changed, like Fernell said, is we are super aware, and children nowadays, like even the younger that they get, the more aware that they are. It's a little scary. It's like, you know, I feel like they come out of the womb aware now. Um, and so I think that that is something that has changed. And yeah.
And we asked Mildred Taylor the same question, and she had a fascinating answer. Brittany, do you want to share some of that answer with us?
We are all aware what politically has changed. We are also aware that despite many African Americans still being suppressed by fewer economic opportunities, many others have risen economically and have middle class or some even upper class lives. What I find concerning about the book is the way it is perceived. Today, many readers were not born when the book was published in 1976, and fewer still were living during the 1930s, the time period of the book. When it was first published, many people at that time had lived through the segregation and hostility of America. Many of those people told me, yes, that's how it was. We understand. You told the story true. I recall a letter from a woman in her 90s who lived in Mississippi. She had read Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. She said she was white, and she said also, to her regret, she knew how true the book was. She had witnessed how Black people were treated. Now, with the passing of so many years, so many decades, there are those people, especially among Black people, who no longer have that understanding, and they take offense to the N word being used in book. Parents who were not even born when the book was first published want to ban the book because they believe their children have been traumatized by reading it. I find this very frustrating. Although understanding parents' concerns about their children's feelings, I believe that in explaining the N word to their children, parents also need to consider the following. What about the children who lived during slavery? What about the children who lived under segregation? What did they endure? They did not read about the N word, they lived under it daily. What was their trauma? That was the reality of their lives, and we need to understand that reality of what they suffered to appreciate the freedoms we have today.
Yeah. There's more from Mildred Taylor on that topic coming to our social media channels in the next few days. So look out for that. Our next question is looking at Cassie as a narrator. How do you think having such a young voice telling that story shapes its impact? I'm going to go to David first.
Reading this book from her perspective, it broke my heart even more because throughout the book, she's so strong. She has such a good sense of her morals and what's right. And that was so frustrating to read, that she just didn't understand. She was just being such a good person. And she was like, why do I have to get off the sidewalk? Just, I didn't do anything wrong and I'm just being a good person. But yeah, it just breaks your heart because she's just, sorry, that I'm have so many words in my head with this. Yeah, she's just such a good kid. And I had never just tried to wrap my head around it as a child. And it hits close to home for me just being mixed, because I kind of felt a little bit lost growing up with where I fit in, being half white and half Black. And seeing her just trying to be kind and doing what's right, and society just continues to put their foot down. And she's just lost. She's just trying to find her way. Yeah.
Absolutely. Larry, do you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah. I think I was really shook actually having Cassie as the narrator. I'm a little older than a lot of you, and maybe a lot of you who are listening. I turned 50 during the pandemic, and I remember the first time I was called a nigger. I was probably around 8, and so the day of Cassie in the store and then going back to the carriage, I have my own version of that, where I was in a fight with a little white kid, but I just thought we were having a fair fight about kickball or whatever we had to be doing, happened to be doing. And when it jumped to nigger, it was like a punch in the gut. Like I absolutely didn't know how to process it. And I got on my bike and I rode home crying. And I walked in the door and I remember my mother was washing the dishes. And our kitchen was like connected to the garage, but I mean the garage that way. So I walked in and I blurted out, John called me a nigger. And there are so many parallels between what Cassie's mother did for her and what my mother did for me, because self-pity in that moment is not a luxury. And it's a pivotal moment. I can't even imagine being a Black parent, because that moment is like the weight of it and how a parent navigates those first negative interactions with white people really sets a child up for how they perceive the world and then how they perceive the safety of their own home. And I think that's the other thing that I loved about this book particularly, that the family unit was so stable that the kids had the space to ask every question that came to their mind, and that the parents and grandparents and uncles gave them the space to ask.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Larry. Yeah, I also read this as a young person, and I didn't, when I started rereading it, I was like, oh yes, of course I remember everything about this book. But until I started rereading it, I just knew that I read it and that I loved it, but I couldn't recall anything specific about it. Though this is one of my mom's favorite books of all time, so I've always been surrounded by it. But looking back on how it affected me, I probably read it when I was about Cassie's age, and I had a similar disposition of, I know how the world works and I know what's right, and I'm going to tell people what's right. So I can only imagine that I really connected with her as a narrator, and with being able to go home to a family unit that was so pro-Black, lifting us up. But I don't remember ever like learning what racism was. Like it was, well, I don't know if y'all know this, but my dad was an artist and did a book called The Middle Passage. And it's this long book of 60 stunning and horrendous photos depicting the Middle Passage. And I grew up in his art studio while he was creating this. So I was always surrounded by these images. It was never a question if Black people and white people were seen as equal in the world to me. Like I knew as part of my core that it wasn't. So this book actually gave me like more courage, I think, to walk through the world like Cassie did, and was like, I'll deal with the problems as they come. I know who I am as a human being, if that makes sense. Morgan, I know you read this when you were young as well. What kind of effect did it have for you?
I might have read this book when I was younger than Cassie. I loved Mildred B. Taylor, and Mildred, if you ever see this, I love you so much. I think I might have read all of her books. I'm obsessed with her. But yes, there's so many, as a Black woman growing up in the South, because I grew up in Alabama, and NIANI grew up in South Carolina. And so there's still so many parallels that I found with Cassie, and I was so stubborn. I was just like her. You cannot tell me. I was like, this is right and this is wrong. But as David said, her being so young, she was a little bit sheltered by her family. And so this book coming from her perspective was, you were having the same reactions as she was experiencing these things for the first time. She was like, why? I don't understand. And you as the reader is also like, it's because you can't understand it. Like, you almost want to say, like, there's nothing to understand. It doesn't make any logical sense, honey. Like, you can't, and you're just as frustrated as her, especially when she goes to her parents. And I'm sure that probably every Black person, I don't know who's born in America, has had an experience of experiencing overt racism and going home to their parents and then being like, why? You're supposed to have all the answers, and then being like, there is no answer. And so you also feel that frustration with Cassie as she's like, but why did they do that? She's asking Stacey, she's asking her mom, and there's like, because they did it because they can, like, and people are always going to see you that way. And I also do want to say about this, Larry is much older and he's experienced overt racism, but like, I am not that old, and I have also experienced overt racism. You know what I mean? Like, because I feel like people are like, oh yes, like this used to happen all the time, and people used to use that word and blah blah blah, and I'm like, people called me the N-word. I was in 6th grade, to my face, and it's a different situation reading about it. It's another situation, the face of someone who you go to classes with, who's kind of nice to you on a daily basis, who you think maybe is your friend, and then all of a sudden something happens and the script flips, and you're like, wait. And I feel like maybe every Black person has had this experience. I don't know. I'm also having a unique experience. I grew up in Alabama, but I remember going home and telling my mother like what happened, and yeah, her response was probably similar to Larry's mother's response, but her response was kind of like, you know, I remember like my mom's like a very huggy person. She's like, oh, come here, baby, let me hug you, love you, blah, blah, blah. But in that moment, she just kind of looked at me and she was like, yes. And she had to let me sit with that. She couldn't in that moment as a mother kind of baby me and like hug me and stuff, but she just kind of was like, correct, this is kind of what happens in the world sometimes. And I would be doing you a disservice as your mother by trying to protect you from it, because I can't always protect you from it. And there's always going to be people like that. And I was like, well, what do I do? And she was like, you have to just know who you are. You have to just know who you are. You have to always know your value. No, it's probably not going to do anything good for you to get upset and yell and scream. You just have to sit with that and understand that this is the world you live in. And so I connected with Cassie in that way, having the revelation of being like, this is what I know is right, this is what I know is wrong, but this is the world that I live in, and having to like just accept that and sit with that. So yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, it's a lot, y'all. Okay, next question. How does this book deal with ignorance versus innocence? And how does that connect to your personal life? I'm going to go to FERNELL first.
I think the book, from when I was reading it, I think it's one and the same. I think there's something so innocent about being ignorant. Something that I learned, because we learn about segregation and slavery, we learn from an overview perspective, and it coming from Cassie's view, they had to teach her that the world was segregated, and that never clicked to me. I always thought like you came out and you were like, it's a segregated world, it is what it is, but no, it's all learned. She learned it just like the Wallers had to learn it. Everyone had to learn to be that they learned their evil ways, and she learned that she was lesser than. So that was just her. She was innocent, and she didn't know that. That was imparted on her by the world. She came out, and the world gave that to her on a platter, and then that applies to me because there was something so blissful about my ignorance. I thought racism was dead for so long. Like, I don't think I realized that the racism was still around until 10th grade, if I'm being honest. Because I grew up in an all-Black community, and I went to my first, there was one white kid in my school all the way up to 8th grade. And then in 9th grade, I went to a different school district, and then I was like surrounded by white people, and I was like, oh, this is like nice and interesting. And then the first day a kid used the N-word, and I was like, oh, I'm uncomfortable. I don't know how to confront this. And then just spending time there, I'm not saying everyone was racist because they weren't. It was a very, very liberal school, but there were people and things that were happening where I was like, oh, this is still around. Racism still exists. But it didn't exist for me because I was in my bubble of like Black people. So I was just like ignorant and innocent. And then I went to this new school and I was like, oh, this is the world, much like how Cassie experienced her life.
Yeah. Britt, you want to speak on that as well?
I agree that innocence and ignorance, they do go hand in hand. I have two instances of the book where I was like, wow, okay, I get it now. Because I also read this book in the 6th grade. I'm from Virginia, so this was on part of our curricular, and it was on our reading list. And I loved this book. And now reading it as an adult, I remember certain things in the book, and then when I got to them as an adult, I was like, oh, I had no idea what this meant when I was reading it in the 6th grade, completely innocent and oblivious to what was happening. And a part that sticks out to me is when Cassie runs into Lily and Jean on the sidewalk, and she goes through that whole thing of Lily and Jean making her apologize. And I was like, oh, her innocence here. She's like, I didn't do anything wrong. Has made way for her ignorance of we're not the same. And it's a very hard lesson for her to learn. And I also thought about TJ as well towards the end of the book when he starts hanging out with, I think it's RW and Melvin, and his innocence is like, oh, like they accept me, and we're all the same, and then they completely throw him under the bus, and he's completely ignorant to it because he hasn't quite understood that they're not the same. And I think that the book does a really good job with like seeing the world through like the kids' eyes, and then also the adults that already know, that are like, they're like, Uncle Hammer, you can't go down there. It's gonna end bad. And now I just saw it so clearly reading it, just the separate worlds. And I will say that I also grew up very innocent and very sheltered in my life. And I loved to dance. And I had this one um, incident in dance where my position was moved to the front line next to this white girl. And her mother got so upset that she took her out of the dance school. And I remember I had a very hard time with this because I just wanted to be friends with everyone and I wanted to dance, and I came home and I was just like, I just don't understand why we can't all just, aren't we all dancing together? I don't understand. And my mother had to have the conversation of like, well, it's not all the same. We're trying, but it's, and some people are going to have issues with it. And I was maybe in like the 5th grade, and it was just a very hard lesson for a 10-year-old to learn. I felt like my world was just falling apart, because I wanted everyone to like me and dance with all of my friends, and I just didn't understand why this was happening to me. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think also the interesting thing about how the story is told is we hear so much of what the adults are saying to each other that Cassie is overhearing. So it depends on where you are in your life, how much you take from the adult conversations and how much you understand of those conversations, or if you're hearing it the same as Cassie. ERIKA, want to speak on that, ignorance versus innocence?
Yeah, there's one moment that really stands out to me when Ma gets fired from her teaching position because she's teaching things that are not in these very whitewashed history books. And sort of relating back to Cassie being the narrator too, and having read it when I was in 6th grade, there's something that happens when it comes to the way we educate children, white children, about a history that we deny our implications in. And I saw it in that moment where she's saying, I'm teaching something that's not in the book. And then also my experience, relating this back to my experience of reading it as a child, that it was treated like something that happened a long time ago and that it didn't happen anymore. And that it was like, this is a historical book that you should read to know about this terrible era of time. But that's it. Like the door is closed on that chapter. And I think there is sort of a reckoning that any educator and any student has to do of seeking the actual truth. And I felt this sort of juxtaposition between reading it as an adult now and a child then. And at Cassie's age, when I read it, feeling like, oh, wow, like, that was crazy. Can you believe that? And reading it now and just thinking, oh my God, I can't believe that. As that kid, I thought this was like ancient history. Like it didn't, because I was a white child, because of the way I was educated, and because I chose to live in the ignorance of the system I was a part of. So I really thought it was fascinating watching Cassie and Stacy throughout the book, because you see Stacy learn slowly and he becomes a man over the course of 250 pages because he is constantly questioning, and the conversations he has with his parents, you see that happen over a matter of a year. He goes from a child to a man who understands what the world is and where he has been placed because of the color of his skin. So tracking those two side by side and just sort of seeing the way innocence was so quickly just stripped from that young boy. I think he's maybe only 13 or so, or if that, over the course of 1 year of his life. And then sort of realizing how long it took me as a white child to realize that this is not ancient history. This is not a book I was given in 6th grade to be like, wow, good thing that doesn't happen anymore. Though that's how it was presented by the educational system.
Yeah. Morgan?
So I just wanted to speak on like ignorance versus innocence in the book when it comes to the white children in the book and the Black children in the book, because I think all of the children had elements of ignorance and innocence that they're kids. But for me, anytime Cassie was confused or like upset about something, she has a mouth on her, right? She's gonna say something. I found myself very stressed. I was like, please stop talking. Like in the moment with Big Mom, when they're at the market and she's yelling, she's getting upset, she yells at the man the whole time. I literally had to put the book down twice because I was like, I'm stressed. Stop. You're putting yourself in danger. And I think that's very interesting, because where in this space, ignorance with the white kids allows them to be a danger to the Black kids, but ignorance with the Black children, it puts them in danger. So that was an interesting like parallel that I noticed in how it manifests differently, and how like the society, the shape of the world was just very, very like different.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing observation, Morgan. Yeah. And it connects directly to our next question, which is about Big Ma, and how do we each feel about her approach to teaching Cassie about racism and how to deal with it, or how she dealt with it in that moment. I'm going to throw that to Larry.
I think that moment was particularly infuriating for me, because it made me think of basically like, for hundreds of years, I feel like African Americans have had to make these minute by minute decisions to sacrifice our self-esteem and our dignity, or sacrifice our bodies. And I don't think that it's fair. And I find it infuriating that Big Ma is faced with this moment where my husband, my parents, this land, my grandchild could be maimed and killed, our livelihood and how we survive economically, our ability to help ourselves and help their community. Because I mean, the way I read it, they were doing the best out of all the people in that community. Their whole position, to be of help to themselves and to be of help to others, was at jeopardy, and their dignity had to be sacrificed for it. And it's a very particularly infuriating thing where we're not allowed to have both. Our inner sense of self and a roof over our heads, or a legacy to leave our grandchildren, and I think that's the moment that Big Ma had to figure out. And then, when Cassie was angry with how Big Ma handled it, I think Stacy beautifully explained it to her, and her mother really explained it really beautifully to her. But I felt my most sadness for Big Ma, because it was just another one of those moments where she has to decide between two things that are priceless. And I hate that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of sacrifice in this story, and a lot of how much can I give without giving up my whole freedom, and what do I gain by giving this much, right? Like, even in the end, Papa had to give up some of his cotton in order to save TJ's life. Like, it's all just a negotiation of what is too much and what am I willing to risk. And on a like a smaller level, I think that's something that Black people still have to do every day. Like, it's something that I've dealt with a lot. And when people say, why is it always about race? And like that, I'm like, do you know that it's a constant question of, do I speak on this right now? Like, every other word that somebody says to me, it's a choice. Am I going to speak on that, or am I going to live the rest of my day without bringing this up? And I feel in this book, it's like macro example of this like give and take that's always there. But going back to that question about Big Ma, I'm going to throw it over to David.
I completely agree with Larry. For me, that part was very difficult because, again, we're talking about Cassie with her wonderful morals, and Big Ma is forced into this situation where she needs to protect her grandchild, who does not understand what society has forced upon her. And I had, same with Morgan, I had to put the book down for a second to think, because I almost found myself at times getting frustrated with Cassie. I was like, why can't you just stop? Why can't you be quiet? Like, what, like, please take a second and breathe. But then I also felt for her, and I questioned myself with that reaction. And I also questioned Big Ma at the same time, like, why couldn't she have been a bit more nurturing? But then when I had to take a step back and put myself in her shoes and think, truly, I've never been in a situation like that. I've been very fortunate but for Big Ma, she's literally, her grandchild could be seconds away from death. And what do? I'm sure there were so many things running through her head with, how do I communicate these things? And she's still so young. She might not be able to wrap her head around something like this, but I have to do something. I have to take a stand right now, whether that be protecting my grandchild or standing up for what I believe in. But she knew that standing up for what she believed in and what Cassie believed in was going to be the most dangerous scenario for her whole entire family. And seeing Cassie's frustration with that was very difficult for me to kind of really sit with that, because it's just, yes, times are so different, but we also, as we've been discussing, we see how it's still somewhat the same in today's day and age. There's still this difficult conversation that needs to be had with mixed kids and Black kids about where they stand in society and how they just need to be very focused about what's happening around them and how you use your words and your energy. And yeah, my heart goes out to Big Mom, because it's not, I couldn't imagine. I could not imagine being in her place with that.
Yeah. And I think that that conversation that Cassie has with her dad, where he's like, you have to choose your battles, speaks to that beautifully, and choosing the way that you fight your battles, because she finds her way to get back at Lily and Jean, right? Which is like wild, and I love that moment. But it's always a choice, and what do you value more in that moment, like your safety or saying what you need to say, which is a choice that no one should have to make, but is a real choice here. Okay, y'all, this book is so complex, but if you could boil it down, what do you think is one of the most important messages that our readers should take away from Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry? I'm going to go to each of you. I'll start with Erika.
I think, especially we saw it with the way Big Ma passed down stories, and both parents did, and made sure the children were aware of the history. That history is our history. That past is still our present. And I think it is very, like we said, it's very interesting to revisit it now as adults, this book, because it's cyclical. It's like that is not over. We will not escape that. We have to reckon with it. And so I hope if people are rereading this or reading it for the first time, that they take away that the history is still very much alive and with us, and we cannot let it disappear as something that is of another era, because it is present.
For now.
I think the message that I'm taking from is that, like, our most important tool of organization is our dollar. They got together as families and they said, we're all going to shop in Vicksburg because we need a change to happen. And right now, I think when we need a change to happen, our best tool as a community of Black people and supporters is our dollar. So organize around your money.
David?
I completely agree with Erika. The message still resonates very much so in today's climate. It is different, but it still is so real, and we need families to start teaching. For me, we need families to start teaching their children this at a young age. I don't think that this is something that we need to start learning as we get older. I think it's a very, very, very important message to share with our children now, because as we see, white supremacy is still, it's raging across America. There are children that still believe that they are supreme just because of their skin tone, because their parents are not also, their parents are not educated. They don't know how to speak on this, because that is also what they were taught as children. So a book like this is so powerful to start to show everyone that we are all equal. We are all equal, and we need to remember what our past is, just as Erika said, because history is repeating itself, and we need to take a step up and try to really attack this head on.
Britt?
A message that really sticks out to me, and this can piggyback off of Erika also said, is respect. And that's like self-respect, as far as, Cassie and her beliefs of who she is, and her respecting herself, even though they tried to bring her down, and then respecting one another as well, and respecting history and the way that it is, and moving forward, I just think that respecting each other can help in a lot of ways. So self-respect and respecting each other.
Morgan?
So yeah, this book for me, experiencing it, this is probably the sixth time I read this book. I love this book. As a Black person in America, and something I feel like that is easily skipped over in the book because of everything else that's happening, that's just like has such high shock value to someone who is like completely unaware, is the many, many moments of joy and laughter and compassion and love, family ties, like that happen in this book, should be viewed as just as important and just as, I guess, touching and profound as the many moments of overt racism and coming of age as a Black person, because, you know, you learn about history and you learn about all of our struggles, and you learn that we're very strong people, and yes, we are, and yes, that's true. But for me personally, I don't feel like there's anything like, there's nothing heroic about having to be strong, because that is the position that you're put in. Do you know what I mean? Like, that shouldn't be something that's valued by people who aren't Black. Like, oh, Black people are so strong. It's like, we're strong because we have to be, but we're also very human. So what I took away from the book was the joy of the Logan family. They always stuck together. They always looked out for each other. And, you know, I can't even think about, like, if you go all the way back to slavery, I can't even think about a moment when I heard about, like, Black people and their joy and their laughter, because you know that it was happening. They were laughing, they were playing music, they were like doing all these things. We only hear about the struggle. And so I feel like it's important to, if you're reading this book, also notice all of the loving, kind, joyful things that were also happening in this book.
Larry?
Yeah, my big takeaway also was the family, and how, especially for a reader or for a new reader, experiencing African American history, that, you know, this book was published in 1976, and I mean, there was a healthy Black marriage at the center of that. And, you know, like, you know, a school teacher and a man with a great job, and his brother had a great job, and that family unit was so tight and so healthy and warm. And it's ridiculous that that's mind-blowing, and it's ridiculous that that is subversive, but I mean, she really wrote a subversive book. It's like a healthy Black family dealing internally, functioning really beautifully, you know, and facing a hostile world together. And I think that's incredible.
Yes. Echoing that, I am really taking away the strength in community and what you can do even in hard times, when you come together with the people around you, and use them as support in joy and in pain. Everyone, this has been an incredible discussion. I have so enjoyed it, and having it with y'all has been so amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. And thank you to the fans who read along with us. Be sure to check out our social media feeds over the next weeks to see more from Mildred Taylor, the author. In her own words, y'all, the things that she had to say are incredible, not a surprise to anyone. She is perfect. Let's get to work to bring about necessary change for 2021 and beyond. Please be passionate, compassionate, understanding, and take care of each other. Mean Girls looks forward to continuing our book club discussions and growing along with you as a family. Until next time, happy Black History Month, everybody. Thank you so much.